So, folks, it's time to get started. I wish you all a very good morning. Welcome to Austria, welcome to Styria, and welcome to Graz, where we are at here. You see our clock tower, our beloved city site on this slide that you have maybe seen now several times on our web pages and everywhere. And when we started to prepare for this conference 4 years ago, we didn't know what to expect. We jumped into this without a lot of preparation, and it was a long journey. Many people have contributed and helped us, to whom we will thank actually the closing session. But some of you may remember that from the beginning, when this conference in Graz was announced at Interspeech in San Francisco, we used a recurring musical theme to remind you how joyful such an event can be, starting from its announcement until its actual execution today. And this is how we will start again today. So this has allowed all 2,000 people to come in here in this hall. So this is a new Interspeech record, to have more than 2,000 participants. And I will give you some information on you, the participants, that we have collected. So as of September 14, we were around 2,050, and we looked at some of the statistics that we observe. So the larger portion, obviously, is full participants, but we have around 30% of students, which means over 600 students and early-stage researchers are here and are contributing to our field, and give us the chance also to welcome them all here. If we look at countries, I took the liberty, being this still the month of September, to combine all countries from the European Union together, including some countries who are not so sure about it. And that gave us a total of 700, and then we go down the range and there's even a few more countries. So we really have a widespread audience from all over the world. And as an Austrian, I'm of course also very lucky that compared to last year, we could even multiply the number of participants by 4 this year, still being a tiny number, but very happy about this. We started for the first time, also in the interest of ISCA, a little survey, and out of the 2,000 participants, about 1,100 responded to our questions, and I just give you a first glimpse on this. ISCA will further analyze these data. So our gender distribution is about 80-20 male to female, which is maybe not a surprise to you. We also have 5 diverse members, which is good for our general diversity, and there will be a special event on Thursday lunchtime organized on diversity in ISCA. Regarding work environments, the distribution is again quite interesting: 60% academic, 40% from commercial backgrounds. These are scientific participants, it's not our exhibitors, so it shows that our field is really heavily resting on 2 shoulders, and I think that's good that we have this continuous scientific interaction between these 2 large parts. So, our conference topic, just to remind you of that, crossroads of speech and language. Where are we now? Well, in this little red country, and what is special about the location where we are? Now, by zooming into it, you may remember that this is exactly where the Germanic, Romance, and Slavic language families meet. So it's really a crossroads in many senses, and you will also experience this in our technical program. How can we make this possible? Well, first of course, all of you had to pay registration fees. Luckily, they didn't grow, that actually they fell compared to the last few years. And this is due to our very generous sponsors that I show here that are not only generous in terms of supporting the budget of this conference, but they also offer a lot of possibilities to interact with them, and please make use of it to maximize your conference experience. We also have supporters from the local community in particular. It's not me standing here alone as a representative of the University of Technology, but all other universities in Graz have contributed, and even the University of Maribor, which is a different country, but still it's just 60 kilometers away, and we are glad to have Strako Kacic as my co-chair being present also today. I have to now introduce to something that will carry us through all these opening, closing sessions, social events. We are in Austria, so this is the country of music, and we will try to put a lot of effort into our music presentations. That was possible because we could tightly cooperate with our University of Music and Performing Arts here in Graz. And if you want to learn more about the composers and in particular the artists presenting you the music, please look in your conference bag where we have a nice music program for you. This morning we start out with a very special piece which is appropriate for a speech conference. It's called Voices and Piano, which uses speeches of famous people as an inspiration for the artist to make his composition on the piano. And we are glad to have Alexandra Radulova here for the piano and Winfried Ritsch, who will support this with live electronics. And the first of the pieces we will hear is about the voice of Hans Eisler, where you can see here a picture from the 40s. And let's listen to this interesting piece.
Johannes Eisler, G-O-H-E-N-N-E-S. E-I-S-L-R, I'm call myself Hans, W-N-S, abbreviation of Johannes. 6th July, Leipzig, Germany. 1898. I'm a composer. The Soviet Union has wonderful composers, and I never was in the foreground movement of the Soviet Union at all. I was, like many, many artists, a guest. In 1935, I had some concerts, some lectures there. The state publishing house prints that a symphony of mine. I had also talks with this publishing house, and this was a stay from 5-6 weeks, I would say. Naturally, I got my fee from the publishing house, as every author gets from every publishing house in the world. I'm not now a communist, and I remember I made, when I was a young man, 1926, an application for the German communists, but I found out very quick that my artistic activities, I couldn't combine my artistic activities with the demand of any political party. So I dropped out. I say I'm not now a member of a communist party. I tried to explain to you that I made 1926 an application for the Communist Party in Germany, but I didn't follow the activities. I dropped out. I got an answer, but I was not active in political groups. But I wouldn't call. I was not really a member. I didn't pay my dues. I didn't pay membership dues. I didn't was active in a political organization, the Communist Party. I can't understand your question, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, an application to join. Maybe it is so. You make an application, you get an answer.
I did not really join. I got an application, I got an answer, but I neglected the whole affair. I told you, Mr. Chairman, I repeat, I made an application but neglected the thing. This is my answer, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Yes. Right. Well, on behalf of the technical program chairs of Interspeech 2019, there's Björn Schüller and myself, I welcome you to Graz. And as Gernot already said, we have a record number of participants, and that is obviously reflected also in the technical program. So there's a huge program awaiting you. We've got already had a day of 8 tutorials, but there's 4 keynotes, there's 115 technical sessions in blocks for 10 days, there's 10 survey talks, there's a hackathon presentation, all of this spanning over 15 technical areas. That's quite a lot. And you obviously have a very colorful program that shows all the diversity in the different areas. The tutorial day was already a great success and a reflection of what is to come. We had 8 tutorials selected out of 12, chosen by the tutorial chairs. We had more than 650 participants, and the smallest participant number on the tutorial was 50, the average was 80. So I think this was a great day yesterday, and lots of people enjoyed that. So we have show and tell sessions. There's 44 out of 44, and this time we did something slightly different. We asked people to produce videos and to help the selection process, and these videos will be made available after the conference. And some of them are really professional made, some of them were just made by phone, and it was, I think, a good idea and it worked really well. Survey talks. This is a new addition to Interspeech. These are meant to be talks that give a review, a survey of the state of the art in a certain field, and we wanted to ideally cover all the areas. There will be one survey talk running in this hall every single session, and these talks will take about 30 minutes and hopefully will give you great insights. There will be special issues on speech communication and CSL journals following up that and hopefully get these surveys into paper form. Special sessions. We have 10 special sessions this time, and interestingly this time we have 50% of those that are associated with challenges. So challenges on quite diverse things, some of them very local. This is about Styrian, the local region dialects, but also we have diarization, zero resource, voice spoofing, and so on. So please attend these special sessions. What else? Well, the rest of the technical program, quite obvious how it came about. You wrote the papers. We provided the facilities to upload. The reviewers read them. And the area chairs decided and actually met here in Graz to make the final decisions and to discuss the papers themselves. And we organized and moved and so on. Area chairs. Of course, for a conference of this size, the number of area chairs that organize in the various sessions is huge. We had 42 area chairs, and this year, because of the size,
we organized it so that we had a lead area chair for each area, which are underlined on the slides as well. Of course, you can also see these area chairs listed on the Interspeech 2019 web pages as well. So thank you very much for the area chairs. They did a fantastic job, and they had a lot of work to do as well in selecting the process. So, record numbers of participants, and we already had an inkling that that was going to happen when we saw the number of submissions that we had received. We had 2,180 submissions to Interspeech. That's an up of 20% to the largest Interspeech before. From these, of course, through the review process, as in previous years, people withdrew papers after the first week deadline, but still, the number that actually went to review, 1,855, is up by 20%. And what is astonishing is the number of different authors that we had in these submissions. 4,900 different authors in the speech community. That's a fantastic number. Also, we have, the institutions are a bit harder to count, so we have between 1,500 to 1,900 different affiliations that we could measure. And relating that to the percentages that Gernot represented on the participants, you can see that sort of we have this around one-third split between sort of academic institutions and commercial institutions in those evaluations, and about 5% associated with government institutions. If you just look at the authors, the percentage for the academics is slightly higher, but again, these are sort of slight variations around the same theme. What was interesting to us as well was that when we look at the authors, we can also see that 17% of the submissions are actually having authors from different sectors, so academic and commercial, or government and commercial, and so on. And I think that's a great number, and I think it shows that this community knows how to collaborate across boundaries. From these numbers, we had an acceptance rate of 49.3%. 914 papers were accepted, and you will see all of those in the coming days. The submission process was normal, nothing out of the ordinary. People certainly made use of revising the papers, on average 4, and some people did more than others, but nothing out of the ordinary. Everything worked reasonably well. The papers were reviewed. There were 1,394 reviewers, and again, the split in terms of the different types of affiliation is roughly, again, around the 2/3, 1/3, and between 3 and 5% for government institutions. The reviewers were coming from 62 countries, and a total of 5,879 reviews were provided. You can see here on the diagram the sort of number of reviews per reviewer that were provided in terms of histogram. So what were the chances of success when we look at sort of the scores that reviewers gave for the various categories, like novelty or clarity or correctness and those kinds of things? So if you look at individual reviews, if somebody gave you a top mark in novelty, you had about a 77% chance that your paper got accepted. It goes down to one of the new questions that we had added, reproducibility of science, which is 60% chance of success if you got the top mark there. If you, however, got a 6 grade on the overall recommendation of the paper, there was a 90% chance from a single review that the paper was going to be accepted. So high scores are definitely a good thing. We also correlated the different types of scores, and I apologize that this is a bit small to read there. So what you have here is the reviewer confidence, you have the correctness scores, you have the quality scores, you have the novelty score, reproducibility scores, and you have the overall recommendation correlated with the final acceptance decisions. What you can see is that the overall recommendation scores correlate with all the other scores, but otherwise the picture is very mixed. And so you can also see that the correlation with the final decision is not immediately obvious, because obviously more than one review goes into the final decision of the process. And so you can see the complexity of the situation that the area chairs faced themselves. One thing that struck us really strongly is when we looked at the acceptance rate across the number of authors that a paper had. if you managed to get the paper accepted, when you wrote the paper yourself, you did extremely well. It's much tougher. However, if you manage to assemble 12 or more authors to work with you, that's really a good chance of getting accepted. So the message here is find your collaboration partners for the next papers in the next Interspeech, because then you get your papers through. What we also thought we should look at the end was the job that we all did, and all the area chairs and all the reviewers. Are we going to be replaced by the algorithms that we are developing? So we try to model prediction with deep neural networks on the basis of purely the submission. So the abstract text, the country of affiliation, and readability scores on the abstract. At the moment, well, we've got a way to go. We have an F1 score of around 60 on just the pure submission data. Of course, if we look at reviews, preliminary results show us that we can get 70 easily from a single review as well. So there's a time to go, but maybe something for the future. And with that, I thank you and welcome you to Graz, and please enjoy the technical program. The next voices and piano piece will be to a speech from Marcel Duchamp.
I have a very definite theory, call it theory so that I can be wrong, that a work of art exists only when the spectator has looked at it. Until then, it's only something that has been done that might disappear and nobody would know about it. But the spectator consecrates it by saying, this is good, we'll keep it. And the spectator in that case becomes posterity. And posterity keeps the museums full of paintings, don't they, today? My impression is that these museums, called the Prado, called the National Gallery, called the Louvre, are only receptacles of things that have survived, probably mediocrities. Because they happen to have survived, there's no reason to make them so important and big and beautiful, and there's no justification for that label of beautiful. They have survived. Why have they survived? It's not because they are beautiful. It's because they have survived by the law of chance. And I think my real feeling is that a work of art is only a work of art for a very short period. There's a life in a work of art which is short, even shorter than man's lifetime. I call it 20 years. After 20 years, an Impressionist painting has ceased to be an Impressionist painting because the material, the color, the paint has darkened so much. That's no more what the man did when he painted it. All right. That's one way of looking at it. So I apply this rule to all artworks. And they, after 20 years, are finished. Their life is over. They survive, all right, because they are curators of art history. And art history is not art. I don't believe in preserving. And I think, as I said, the work of art dies. It's a thing of contemporary life. In other words, in your life, you might see things. It's because it's contemporary with your life. It's been made at the same time as you were alive. And it has all the requisites of the definition of work of art, which is to make. And your contemporaries are making works of art. They are works of art at the time you live. But once you're dead, they die too. And the reason is that ideas can survive more without distortion, without death is longer for ideas, because the language stays on for at least a few centuries. In other words, 50 years ago we like this, 100 years ago we like that, showing the doubtful judgment of humanity on works of art. And that's why I like it to be only 20 years, so I have a short life. I didn't care. Yes, I learned it in Lille. I was lunching with a friend of mine who had it, and Miss Dry, and she couldn't announce it to me. It was very funny. So, in fact, when she was so much moved by the fact that she had to announce it to me, my reaction was really a cold reaction to help her. You see, of charity instead of despair. And it did. It was exactly like that. It was not despair at all. I have a very great form of philosophy of that kind, to accept any malheur as it comes. I mean, I'm not going to fight it too much. I don't fight back. I'm against the word anti because it's very like atheist as compared to believer. And an atheist is just as much a religious man as the believer is. And an anti-artist is just as much of an artist as the other artist. An artist would be much better if I could change it instead of anti-artist. AN artist, meaning no artist at all. That would be my conception. I don't mind being an artist.
Welcome. I'm John Hansen. I serve as the president of ISCA. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our friends, colleagues, and guests for Interspeech 2019. First time that Interspeech has been in Austria, truly representing the crossroads of speech and language. Just to give you a little bit of background, ISCA is a nonprofit organization. We exist solely to provide support for the advancement of both science and technology in the field of speech communication. So we're here to provide support for you to learn as much as you possibly can and hear what you're going to deliver this coming week in terms of your advancements in your research. I'd also like to particularly thank the organizers, in particular both Gernot and Stravko, as well as Bjorn and Thomas. If you go through an entire conference, you kind of assume that everything should go perfectly. When things go the way they do, it's because someone actually paid enormous amounts of attention to all the details. With a conference this size, especially a record number of attendees, record number of papers, this committee organized and moved very, very effectively over the last year, making sure that the papers were reviewed in the most professional way, as well as providing all the infrastructure and support for this conference to be such a great success. We hope you will enjoy that. I'd also like to extend a sincere thanks to the sponsors and the exhibitors for Interspeech 2019. Your financial support directly goes to helping us ensure that we keep the registration costs low, as Gernot had noted, but it also provides direct support for our students and young researchers to attend Interspeech. I'll also make one comment here. There are a couple things I'll highlight, but during the week, I know you may focus on a particular area in your research. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to at least 3 new people each day. Go to one session that you would never have gone to. Learn something new that you haven't seen before. And ask questions. We're all here to learn. So in terms of our society, I would like to extend a sincere thanks to the Interspeech 2018 organizers in Hyderabad. They put on an outstanding program. This is the first time it was in India, and the technical program and the logistics for Hyderabad was just phenomenal. So we're very, very pleased and want to thank them for the great success they had last year. I'll say, unfortunately, when looking at our society, we have sometimes people that pass away. So I'd like to note Sylvia Mussmuller, who was a faculty member here in Austria, passed away last year. I'll read a note here from one of her colleagues. Sylvia Mussmuller built up the Acoustic Phonetics group here in the Acoustics Research Institute of the Australian Academy of Sciences and made significant contributions to the phonetic and phonological variation of Austrian German. She applied her expertise also in interdisciplinary research projects on speech synthesis, machine translation for language varieties. She was a passionate scientist and a treasured colleague. I also identified here a couple of the high point papers that she's published in her career. So I'd like to ask if we can take a moment of silence to recognize Sylvia Mussmuller's contributions to the field. Thank you. So moving on, I'll give a brief update on the ISCA state of our society. We will have more details this afternoon at 5 o'clock at the ISCA General Assembly. I was trying to figure out a way to encourage all of our attendees to go to the General Assembly. I tried convincing the ISCA board that all the males needed to show up in lederhosen and all the females in dindles. Unfortunately, I couldn't convince the ISCA board to do this, but I encourage you to at least come to the ISCA General Assembly. You'll see a lot more details there, okay? For our society, this is our board, the ISCA board for 2018-19. We had a number of folks that were completing their service. Kai Berkling, Lori Lamal, and Satoshi Nakamura completed their service this year. And we had an election, so 3 board members were re-elected, myself, Toraborn, and Sebastian. And for this coming year, we had 3 new elected board members that included Margaret Meg Zellers, Chinhua Tao, and Nobuaki Minamatsu. Okay, those are the 3 new board members. And so you can recognize them. Thank you. Okay. And during the week here, we have a number of ISCA events that I'd like to highlight. We already had the Students and Young, the Travel Awards. So because of the support we received for this conference, we had 60 plus 3 awards for travel support for students and young scientists. In terms of the events for this week, we had the Doctoral Consortium, which took place on Saturday. We also had the workshop for young female researchers in speech science and technology, which also took place on Saturday. We have the ISCA General Assembly that takes place today at 5 o'clock. We also have the Student Mentoring Program here at ISCA, here at Interspeech 2019. That'll take place on Tuesday from 4 till 6. If you're a PhD student and you'd like to know more about this, please attend. We also have the Students Meet Experts, which takes place on Wednesday as well, from 1:30 to 3:30. In terms of our conferences, we have the next Interspeech 2020 taking place in Shanghai. You'll see a little bit more about the organization of that Interspeech in the closing ceremony. Bruno will take place in 2021. You may have actually seen the announcement for 2022, but if you haven't, it's been on the ISCA pad several times. In 2022, we'll be going to Dublin, Ireland. Okay. And you'll hear more of these, all 3 of these organizational committees in the closing ceremony. In terms of our membership, we continue to grow and gather strength. We also increase our diversity. So we have, over the last 2 years, over 2,200 members for ISCA. and over 675 student members. So roughly 1/3 being students and 2/3 being full members. And so that shows the vitality of our society. In terms of finances, we're in very good financial shape. We've actually planned, if you can believe this, for deficit spending. Since we are a nonprofit, we've attempted to try and get a negative deficit, or to get a deficit in the operating process, but we've been quite successful, and we're looking at new opportunities to try and reach out and strengthen the programs here. We'll have more on the financial side this afternoon. One of the strategic areas that we put a lot of emphasis on this past year has been in diversity, both recognizing and encouraging diversity of our membership and our community. So ISCA is committed to supporting all aspects of diversity in terms of membership, community, and member recognition. The diversity areas, the first would be on gender diversity. That includes both membership, leadership roles, as well as awards and recognition. Regional diversity, roughly about 1/3 of our membership is from the European area, Asia and Australia, and North America. We obviously would like to expand and strengthen our involvement in both South America and Africa. If you are from these continents, we would greatly encourage you to participate and be involved. We would really like to see if we can bring an Interspeech to these two continents. We also want to ensure a balance between both science and technology. We live in an area of artificial intelligence and machine learning, but core science integrated into these areas make it really critical for us to look at long-standing contributions to the field. And finally, balancing both the academic, industry, and government sectors in terms of our representation for membership. Our diversity committee was established this past year, so Odette, Mark, and Julia, as the external member from our from our IAC, serve as the diversity committee. This past year, they've been focused primarily on the gender side. In terms of ensuring high quality and a safe conference and workshop environment, we've instituted the Code of Conduct for conferences and workshop attendees. This is an important aspect to emphasize. We'll highlight a bit more of this in the ISCA General Assembly. But if you come across any, or if you experience any aspect related to harassment, discrimination regarding either gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, disability, or any physical aspects, please seek out, identify one of the ISCA board members. You can send email to the ethics email address here, and all communications are held confidentially, and we will follow up on each of these points that are raised. In addition to that, we also have a code of ethics for our authors. Unfortunately, I think when we look at the competition it takes to get papers accepted, as Thomas pointed out, you may, if you can recruit 12 co-authors, maybe that increases your chances of getting a paper accepted. But we also have to understand that we need to maintain a high standard of ethics for the publication process. So we've established these guidelines here for authors to follow. These are posted on the ISCA website, and they're also a requirement of every ISCA event, both Interspeech and all the workshops. And we'll highlight a bit more of those in the General Assembly. We have unfortunately have identified a couple of cases of papers that had to be rejected because of confidentiality issues. Also, some highlights. We have the ISCA Web and Communications program. These look at the ISCA pad that comes out each month. Chris Willikins has been instrumental in overseeing that. We also have Scoot, that's the speech communication online training system that both Kai had been heavily involved in, as well as Phil Green, and several other folks have been involved in communicating, increasing the communications aspects here, both through the web and through online systems. We also have a very, very active student advisory committee. If you are a student attending Interspeech, please seek out one of the student members here. We very, very much would like to have you involved in the student SAC committee. Now we'll move on to the awards program. So in terms of awards, we're going to first look at the Best Student Paper Awards. We have 13 finalists that will be presenting their papers the next 4 days. One today, there will be 3 tomorrow. So we'll highlight these also in the General Assembly. We have 3 for Wednesday that will be presented, and quite a few on Thursday. There's 3 here on Thursday, which is the first set, and additional 3 on Thursday as well. So a total of 13 papers that will be presented and voted on by the Student Best Paper Review Committee. In addition to that, we also have our Fellows Program. So I'll just highlight briefly what the Fellows Program exists. We first seek out nominations from the ISCA community, so anyone can nominate someone for an ISCA Fellow. Online web page and application process is on our web page. We include 4 external fellow review reference letters that are included with each application, and a separate ISCA Fellows Committee is used to both review and vote on the ISCA Fellow Awards. So I'd like to ask Hema Murthy if she could join us up on stage to identify the ISCA Fellows so we can present their awards. Oh, I get everything. So you're going to read the names? Yeah.
Yeah, the first one is Martin Ada Decker. There's no order here. And she receives the fellowship for contributions to multilingual speech processing and large-scale corpus-based linguistics and for bridging communities. Martin Ada Decker.
So that's the certificate. That's your...
I think you just wait here, right?
Sorry?
She just waits here, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just stay here.
Jennifer Cole for theoretical and experimental descriptions of the sources of phonological and prosodic variability in spontaneous speech. Jennifer Cole. Mark Gales for wide-ranging fundamental contributions to research and leadership in the fields of speech recognition, synthesis, and statistical modeling algorithms. Mark Gales.
Congratulations. Stay here,
Yanis Stelianov for contributions to speech analysis, speech modification, and speech communication. Christian Bellikens for pioneering contributions in the use of neural networks in automatic speech recognition and education activity in speech science.
Congratulations.
Valerie Hazen for contributions to speech perception and production. And finally, Douglas O'Shaughnessy for contributions to automatic speech recognition and leadership in the speech community. And yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Doug is still traveling here, so he's not able to make it. So he asked me to accept it on his behalf. So maybe you want to present it to me. I'll hold it. Thank you very much. Congratulations. That's it. Thank you, Hema. So I would also kind of point out that in looking at our ISCA Fellows, we started back in 2008 in recognizing the ISCA Fellow program. We now have 75 ISCA Fellows that span the globe and all areas, both in terms of science, technology, every aspect one can imagine. And so we will continue to expand on the program. So next, we move to the ISCA Scientific Medal. This medal represents the highest achievement awarded by ISCA. The medal recognizes and honors an individual each year who has made extraordinary contributions to the field of speech communication, science, and technology. The process for the ISCA Medal program, we first seek nominations from the ISCA community. This is due by January 1st. These full nominations are then reviewed by the ISCA board with a blind voting process, and all the criteria are listed on the ISCA website. And so it's obviously, if you're only recognizing one person each year, it's a challenge because we have many, many people that are making outstanding and long-standing contributions to the field of speech communication. This year, our winner is Keiichi Tokuda. So this is for pioneering statistical parameter approaches in speech synthesis and for leadership in the provision of enabling software tools. It's been the tradition that we try to bring someone who is an expert in the area to say a few words about the ISCA medalists. So I've asked Alan Black if he could come to the podium to say a few words about the significance and impact that Keiichi has had to the community.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor and pleasure to have Professor Keiichi Tokuda win the scientific medal. I always like to see contributions to speech synthesis, of course, and we've been colleagues and friends for over 20 years, and so this is good to see his contributions actually recognized. Professor Tokuda got his PhD from Tokyo Institute of Technology sometime in the previous millennium, I can't remember when. And for most of his career, he's been at Nagoya Institute of Technology with a number of visits, including at ATR and at Carnegie Mellon University. One of the things, maybe a little point to the younger members of the audience, one of the ways to be successful in a field is to have good citations, and building a new metric, building data sets, building toolkits are a good way to get citations and a good way to become famous. But the thing that's actually really hard is coming up with fundamentally new algorithms for ways to do things. And Tokuda Sensei's work on HMM synthesis, statistical parametric synthesis, was really a fundamentally different way in doing generative synthesis. It was the first time people considered doing generation from statistical models to produce speech. That work has continued into the latest neural network, but his work over the 90s and into the 2000s gave us the chance to have controllable synthesis, gave us a chance to have data-driven synthesis at a level that we didn't really have before. And so I think this is an important contribution that's been recognized. And of course, it's not just the algorithmic aspect of Tokuda Sensei's work, it's the fact that he led a number of pretty famous students through their careers, and of course provided a toolkit so that other people could build on top of that work. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Takuda Sensei.
Thank you very much. So Professor Takuda Sensei will be giving a keynote talk right after the completion of this program here. So that concludes the ISCA component here. The next music portion will be presented by Hannes Galula, right? Voices and piano. Thank you. Sorry.
Also mir hat mein Name immer sehr gut gefallen, Hanna. Das war für mich immer dieses Hanna. Und irgendwie denke ich schon, dass in meinem Leben dieses, dass das eine Aufgabe in meinem Leben war, dass ich so richtig zum Ausatmen komme. Weil angefangen habe ich eigentlich andersrum. Da habe ich mehr eingeatmet als ausgeatmet. Ich habe immer mehr aufgenommen, als ich von mir gegeben habe. Als Kind natürlich nicht, aber später dann. Und auch der anderen, eben auch Shigula, der Name, dieses, dass er so hell anfängt und dann Ulla, dass das so sich ausruht in so einer Kuhle und dass es dann wieder in einem A endet. Ich denke schon, dass die Klänge einen selber auch zum Klingen bringen. Jetzt speziell, wenn man dann den eigenen Namen auch so oft schreibt oder auch oft hört. Meine Mutter wollte mich anfangs Dagmar nennen. Da bin ich ja sehr froh, dass sie das nicht gemacht hat. Ich bin ja geboren 1943, das war ja noch in der Nazi-Zeit. Da war natürlich Dagmar eine sehr sichere Sache, dass sie mich dann ausgerechnet Hanna genannt hat. Ein Name, der mich später eigentlich sehr weit getragen hat, weil viele gedacht haben, vielleicht ist sie auch jüdisch. Oft ist mir der Name zurückgekommen mit einem H wieder am Ende. Das ist ja schon von der Schreibung sehr schön. So war es aber nicht, aber das fand ich doch sehr mutig, dass sie damals in der Zeit mich Hanna genannt hat. Meine Mutter hat immer gesagt, wenn ich sie gefragt habe, ach, da gab es eine Hanna, die war so schön. Aber ob das alles war, weiß ich nicht. Jedenfalls, der Name hat mir immer gefallen.
So, before concluding this morning session, I will give you some updates of more practical nature. Lots of people have asked, what about the badges and the faces on them? Well, they are faces of various Austrian scientists, with some of them having a strong relationship to Graz, but we use them to encode actually your admission rights to various social events or to the abstract book that about half of you have opted for. So you can read this on our webpage and also in our conference app. There will be social events, and I start from the back with the Dancing Interspeech soiree on Wednesday night. Due to the huge number of participants we see already today, we had to look also for a secondary location, which is just opposite the main location. And so in the main location, you will have food and dance and music, and in the secondary location, you have a museum and wine tasting. So make use of both of them. You will be allowed to freely float between the two. We will also organize additional tram rides to bring you from here, from Stadthalle to Stephaniensaal. And one other thing that needs some preparation on your side is, essentially, we will only have standing tables at these events. If you really need a seat, please request so at the registration desk, and you will get a special ticket for it, because we have only very, very limited seating options. Tonight, we have not only the ISCA General Assembly from 5 to 6:30, but the welcome reception right here in this building in the lower level foyers. And then if you look in that direction, there is an outdoor area called the Messe Park, and we will enjoy some folk music, finger food, and drinks. And you will learn what the Austrian word Sturm means. The solution to this riddle stands at the bottom of this page, but I suggest you rather come to the event and try for yourself. To give you an idea of the building, just as a quick orientation, we are now here in the main hall. In front of the main hall, the yellow area is the exhibition area, which is also one of our coffee break areas. Coffee breaks will be always held at the exhibition areas. The orange stuff is essentially lunch areas. Starting from the right, there's a bistro way beyond the registration. You leave the building and then you have a very nice bistro with even some patio seating. We have a huge cafeteria right on that side of the main hall, and there will be food trucks in the Messe Park outside. On the second floor, we have most of our the lecture halls, the gallery with the posters, again an exhibition area for coffee breaks, and another smaller restaurant on the highest level, also marked here in orange. So these are 4 options inside the building that you can choose. But next to these 4 options inside the building, we also have included a lunch map in your abstract book and on the conference app. So within 15 minutes walking radius, there's a lot of different places to sample. And if you jump on one of the trams, it's about 8 minutes to the city center, and then you have all opportunities you like. Regarding water, the water in Graz comes directly from Alpine mountain springs, so it's safe and delicious to drink. And whenever you see one of the coffee bars here in that building, they also provide this very nice water for free. You can get glasses, but you can also freely fill your own bottles and carry this water with you. That's the most convenient way to do. For us, the poster sessions were not just a challenge, but also a way to use it for what I would call an art exhibition. So we had 160 students of architecture who would actually design special poster walls that combine both aesthetics and the acoustic comfort of you into a very nice design. So it's actually an exhibition with an exhibition catalog where you can watch all these 160 different designs. And we thank a lot our colleague from architecture, Milena Stavric, and our sound engineer, Jamila Balint, for organizing this excellent project. The conference app and abstract book are also accessible. Only half of you opted for a printed abstract book. Everybody else will use the conference app. But I suggest also that those who have a conference book still use the app, because we will occasionally push important messages to you. We will not overload you with such messages, but be aware that this is one way to communicate with you. And don't forget to visit the real clock tower to compare it to our tiny clock tower that you received as a USB stick. Finally, when you looked at our webpage, Wolfgang von Kempelen was inviting you to come to Graz. He wrote his book in Vienna, actually, which now is available in an English translation. He could be called like an 18th century Leonardo da Vinci because he was not only an inventor and engineer, but also a drawer, poet, and public administrator. So he had many different skills, and his contribution is, of course, strongly rooted in the development, the first development of acoustic phonetic experiments and theory, the validation of that theory through a mechanical simulator, and the open hardware publication of the simulator that allows us still today to reproduce research that was done 230 years ago. And we had an event in Vienna bringing together 5 such demonstrators of his system, and one of them is shown in the next short movie. So this short movie by Silke Berdux and Alexander Steinbeißer shows that the documentation of this work was sufficient to actually build a replica that can really convince us that he understood about all the sound generation mechanism at the time. We will use this today for the concluding performance of this session. So what we did just here with a mechanical simulator of the human voice will now be turned into an electronic simulation of the audio that we just heard, and that will finally be rendered using a so-called automatic piano or robot piano player. It's again Winfried Ritsch who will kind of show us how that kind of voice that dates 230 years can be played today with an artistic touch. He will do. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Talking about Kempelen, we will conclude with a short note on him. The source filter model of speech production, acoustic phonetic theory developed empirically and validated through mechanical simulation, reproducible research, manifested in an open source description of the simulator blueprint. And now we will conclude this with a live demonstration of the methods that are behind that system, which is essentially a kind of harmonic analysis of the real-time audio signal produced by myself and converted into the mechanical excitation of the piano keys. So at this point, I thank you again for coming here today to this opening session of Interspeech 2019, and I declare this conference for opened. Thank you. Winfried Ritsch. So now it's my honor to invite our ISCA medalist Kiichi Tokuda on stage. He is the first to give us a scientific presentation today as the ISCA medalist, and I think I don't need to waste time introducing him. Alan has done this before in an excellent way. So Kiichi, please, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm grateful for the award. It's an amazing honor for me. I really thank all people involved in the selection process. I also would like to thank my supervisors, colleagues, and students who worked with me, and people who helped us in various ways and gave us valuable comments at conferences and other places. My first conference presentation was at ICASP, but the second one was at ICSLP, one of the predecessors of Interspeech. And then I participated many Interspeech conferences, including ICSLP and Eurospeech, another predecessor of Interspeech. So Interspeech is the place where I feel most at home, and I'm quite happy to have this opportunity to give a talk here. In this talk, I'd like to give an overview of statistical approach to speech synthesis, looking back on the advances in the last couple of decades. Please forgive me in advance, as it's based on my personal experience, so it could be biased and not comprehensive. Okay, text-to-speech approaches have progressed from rule-based ones to corpus-based ones. Before the 90s, rule-based format synthesis had been often studied. In this case, phonetic units are built by handcrafted rules. After the 90s, corpus-based concatenative speech synthesis approaches dominated. In the unit selection approach, shown here, according to the text to be synthesized, speech units are selected from the whole speech database and concatenated in runtime using dynamic programming techniques. State-of-the-art speech synthesis systems based on unit selection can generate natural sounding speech when the database is sufficiently large. However, it restricts the output speech to the same style as that in the original recordings. When we need to generate speech with, for example, various speaking styles or emotional expressions, a larger speech database containing such variations is required. With such a need for more control over speech variations, another corpus-based approach called statistical parametric speech synthesis emerged in the late 90s. In this approach, several acoustic parameters are modeled using a time series stochastic generative model. And when we use hidden Markov model, HMM, it's typically called HMM-based speech synthesis. This is to show the concept of the statistical approach. It's based on the standard source filter model, which emulates human speech production. These control parameters, represented by, for example, male capture and F0 fundamental frequency parameters, are predicted from the text to be synthesized using some acoustic model, HMMs or DNNs, trained in advance by using a speech database. The speech production system can be approximated by using a digital filter or some signal processing technique. We can reconstruct speech waveform from the predicted control parameters. It has several advantages, such as small footprint, automatic voice building process, and small language dependency. But the main advantage of the statistical approach is its flexibility or controllability. For example, we can change speaking styles by applying mathematically well-defined algorithms on the acoustic model. However, there is a serious drawback. It has to use some vocoding technique which degrades the naturalness of synthesized speech. Although vocoding techniques have been drastically improved in the 2000s. For example, straight and word vocoding techniques. The speech quality could not reach to that of human natural speech. Fortunately, the problem seems to be solved by neural vocoding technique, WebNet in the first one. So now there's no reason to hesitate to move on to the statistical approach. When we started HMM-based speech synthesis in 1994, unit selection approaches were very successful. For example, AT&T built a very high-quality TTS systems based on unit selection, which was a big surprise to me. And at that time, many people thought that the problem of text-to-speech synthesis was already solved. As a result, we often got negative advices, like there's no future of statistical approach, because vocoded speech is the upper limit of this approach, which is not acceptable for general users. However, I thought that to construct human-like talking machines, flexibility is more important. And I believed in the progress of speech signal processing technology. To substantiate it, we need almost 25 years of TTS research. Interestingly, rather speech recognition researchers often gave us favorable feedbacks. Probably the reason was that they were already working on the statistical approach to speech recognition. Actually, a speech recognition researcher kindly sent us very well-trained his acoustic model to help our TTS research. It seems that he was also interested in how his acoustic model sounds like. Of course, it sounded like an average voice because the acoustic model was speaker independent. Anyway, we learned a lot from speech recognition research and imported models and algorithms initially developed for speech recognition. For example, HMM training, state clustering, speaker adaptation, and so on. To me, it looked like a marriage between speech recognition research and speech synthesis research. Okay, this is the outline. Let me start with statistical formulation. This is the basic problem of speech synthesis. We have a speech database, a set of pairs of text and corresponding speech waveforms, given a text to be synthesized. But it is the speech waveform corresponding to the text. The problem can be solved by estimating the predictive distribution and then drawing samples from the distribution. It's quite simple and straightforward. However, estimating the predictive distribution is hard. So we introduced some parametric representation, as shown here. Lambda is the model parameters. Then, approximating integral by maximizing this term, you can separate it into the training part and generation part. As we know, modeling speech waveform directly is not easy. So the generation process from text to speech is often decomposed into several submodules. This term corresponds to feature extraction or waveform generation, that is vocoding. X is speech waveform, and O is parametric representation of speech waveform X. For example, male capture and F0, fundamental frequency parameters. And this term corresponds to text analysis, which extracts linguistic feature L from the text to be synthesized. We call L linguistic feature or context vector or contextual factors or label. And this is an example of linguistic features. In speech recognition, preceding and succeeding phone identities are often regarded as context. On the other hand, in speech synthesis, there are many other contextual factors that can affect spectrum, F0, and duration, as shown here. For example, number of phonemes in current syllable or part of speech information, and so on. And this term is the main one, acoustic model, which models relation between linguistic feature L and acoustic feature O. First, we use hidden Markov model as acoustic model. Of course, other time series generative models can be used. For example, trajectory models, DNNs, LSTMs, and so on. And once we decompose the generation process like this, these two problems, training and generation, can be rewritten as shown here. And again, it's approximated by step-by-step maximization for each term, as shown here. The text analysis module is often trained by using an external text corpus. And this corresponds to speech feature extraction, and this corresponds to labeling. And once we obtain the linguistic features and acoustic feature vectors, we can train some acoustic model, lambda. And in the synthesis part, or generation part, first we extract linguistic feature vector L from the text to be synthesized. Then generate speech feature vector O using the trained acoustic model. And finally, generate speech waveform X. As a result, the original program shown here can be decomposed into these feasible subprograms. And this is a standard way to construct text-to-speech synthesis systems in a statistical manner. Here, I would like to briefly summarize the HMM-based speech synthesis approach. Please note that each module corresponds to the subproblem shown in the previous slide. And let me skip the text analysis part. And then I would like to talk about speech feature extraction and speech waveform reconstruction. We assume the system function H represented by mel capture coefficients. That is, frequency warped capture coefficients. By assuming X is Gaussian process, we determine C in such a way that its likelihood is maximized. Because P is convex with respect to C, we can easily obtain the solution by an iterative algorithm. This technique can be regarded as an ML version of mel capture analysis. This is an example of spectral estimate. It has high resolution at low frequencies. To reconstruct the speech waveform, the obtained mel capture from the obtained mel capture, we have to realize the transfer function h of z, although f of z can be implemented by this digital filter structure. H of z cannot be implemented directly because it includes exponential function, which is not a simple rational function. So by approximating the exponential function by a rational function, we implement it in this data filter structure. Please note that each f of z is given by this data filter structure. We refer to it as a MLlog spectrum approximation filter or MLSA filter. When we started HMM-based speech synthesis, most HMM-based speech recognition systems use MFCCs, but there was no explicit resynthesis algorithm based on MFCCs. We were lucky to have the MLSA filter. My supervisor, Professor Imai, is the inventor of the MLSA filter, and I was working on speech analysis and speech coding algorithms based on mel capture and the MLSA filter. Accordingly, it was easy to build a prototype of HMM-based speech synthesis system using mel capture-based techniques. And later, we combined it with the straight vocoding technique. Excuse me. Next module is acoustic model training. In speech synthesis, we need to model not only spectrum parameters, but also excitation parameter, F0 parameters, to resynthesize speech waveform. So each state output vector of HMM should consist of spectrum part and excitation part. This is the state output vector. And spectrum part consists of, for example, mel capture and its delta and delta dynamic feature parameters, which correspond to the first and second derivatives of speech parameter trajectory. F0 part also consists of log F0 and its delta and delta. We are considering many linguistic features or contextual factors as shown in this slide. So for avoiding the data sparseness problem, we apply a decision tree-based context clustering technique in the same manner as HMM-based speech recognition systems. The question list corresponds to the linguistic feature, and HMM states are clustered by selecting the best question step by step. And finally, share the state Gaussians in the same leaf node. By the way, this list is the language-dependent part, and the English version was designed during my sabbatical stay at CMU from 2001 to 2002. Alan Black was the host, and he helped me design the list. Surprisingly and fortunately, his festival speech synthesis system already had functions for extracting almost all these features. So it was very easy to implement an English version on the festival front end. From that, I noticed that both unit selection and the statistical approach are corpus-based, and both systems are having very similar structure. The essential difference is that in the statistical approach, the system uses the probability distribution of training data, but the unit selection system samples from the training data itself. Okay, each knob spectrum and F0 have its own influential contextual factors. So distributions for spectrum and F0 should be clustered independently. Furthermore, to model temporal structure of speech parameter trajectory, we assume that the state durations are Gaussian, and all context-dependent three-dimensional Gaussians are clustered by a decision tree. HMMs having such explicit duration models are called hidden-cell Markov model, or HSMM, and a special type of EM algorithm can be used for parameter estimation. The last module is speech parameter generation. P can be rewritten, as shown here, using state sequence Q. In the same manner as the previous discussion, this maximization problem can be decomposed into these two sub-problems. We can find the solution very easily because those are Gaussian. Unfortunately, the solution for the second problem is inappropriate for synthesizing speech. Because of the piecewise constant statistics and the conditional independence assumption of state output vector, the generated sequence becomes a stepwise function, like this. So to solve the problem, we use dynamic feature parameters. These trajectories show delta and delta delta, which correspond to the first and second derivatives of this trajectory. And these three trajectories are constrained by each other and determined simultaneously, maximizing the total output probability. As a result, the trajectory is constrained to be realistic as defined by the statistics of static and dynamic feature parameters. This is one of the key techniques used in HMM-based speech synthesis systems. If we understand HMM correctly as a statistical model, it's easy to find that using HMM for speech synthesis is a better idea because the piecewise constant statistics and conditional independence assumption. However, HMM-based speech recognition systems achieved very good performance at that time. So I suppose that HMM could have a potential power to model dynamics of speech parameter trajectory, and found that the dynamic feature parameters played an important role to alleviate the problem. Later, we showed that by normalizing the probability distribution with respect to C, we can derive a trajectory model called trajectory HMM, which gives an utterance level mean trajectory and utterance level temporal covariance for a given state sequence Q. I'm sorry, but we don't have enough time to go into details. To show the flexibility of the statistical approach, we applied various types of acoustic modeling technique, speaker adaptation, speaker interpolation, eigenvoice technique, multiple regression techniques. To exemplify such flexibility of the statistical approach, I would like to show a software tool. In the system, a speaker adaptation technique is used for training emotional voice models. Okay. Let me type a text. Oops. Okay, I'm sorry it's in Japanese, but it means it's nice weather today. And in this part, oh, excuse me, that's wrong. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, in this part, each slider represents a specific emotional expression. I'm sorry, it's in Japanese. Happy, neutral, angry, and sad. Let me play them one by one. Happy. Oops. Let me play that again. Neutral. And angry. And sad. And we can thank you very much. And we can change the intensity of each emotional expression. And this shows the mixing ratio. So as an example, I would like to change it gradually from sad to happy. No, it sounds like she's happy. And this tool is designed for digital content creation. So if this interface is not enough, still you can modify it as you like by using another interface. Each box corresponds to a phoneme, and width corresponds to the duration of the phoneme, and height corresponds to average F0 of the phoneme. And by dragging the vertical line, we can change the duration. Oh, repeat it again, please. Or it's quite flexible. And it can also sing with the same voice. Let me put some notes. And let me put lyrics. And now it can sing with the same voice. And we can modify the F0 trajectory and volume and some vibrato parameters and timing. Please note that each vertical line corresponds to a state boundary of HMM. Okay. Constructing such synthesis system is straightforward because musical scores can be regarded as a special type of language. The essential difference is that we need an additional mechanism for beat synchronization. Okay, in the next part, I'd like to talk about deep neural networks. Let me get back to this equation. We use HMM and straight vocoding technique as the base system and applied various types of improvements on it. ZB-based parameter generation, it was very effective, and HSMM training, trajectory HMM training, MGA, minimum generation error training, Bayesian approach, addition tree, and trainable excitation model. However, decomposing the generation process into sub-programs makes the solution suboptimal because we may not be able to achieve overall optimization of the whole generation process. So we were also trying to recombine them to relax the approximations. Those are for tightly connecting these submodules, and this one is for combining these modules. In the meantime, the deep learning era began. First, several types of DNN-based speech synthesis architecture were proposed in 2013 at the same conference, and this one is one of them, in which a feed-forward neural network was used for acoustic modeling. This compares DNN and HMM. Please note that essential parts of HMM are regulation trees. Having plausible structure is an advantage. For example, it's often easy to find errors and bugs by checking the trained decision tree. However, when we use a complicated model structure, for example, additive structure or factor analysis structure, it's difficult to derive a customized EM training algorithm and implement it. On the other hand, in the DNN case, it's easy to implement because of flat structure, even no need for low-level coding when a deep learning framework is used, for example, TensorFlow or PyTorch. However, if the trained model does not work well, it's not easy to understand the reason and solve the problem. Anyway, this feature of DNN makes entry barriers of TTS research very low. It's also a good good side of the DNN approach. Just after the emergence of DNN, I got a chance to have a sabbatical visit to Google from 2014 to 2015. I thought that taking this opportunity, I should work on a novel approach for removing the drawback of vocoding. That is a bottleneck of the statistical approach. So also, I thought that I should work on the algorithms, which were still effective even after 5 or 10 years. For this goal, I try to do this for combining these submodules, measuring likelihood of switch waveform directly, train a neural network which models both voice and voice component. We adapt a speech signal model shown here. It's just a standard speech signal model in which the speech signal consists of a deterministic voice component and stochastic unvoiced component. I worked on this problem with Hager at Google and presented intermediate results at international conferences. However, we could not complete it during my sabbatical stay. And after I returned to my university, Hager and his colleagues continued to work on the same problem with different approach. They found that a special type of CNN-based autoregressive neural network can work for the problem. It was a surprise to me. WaveNet is a nonlinear predictor of speech samples, but according to the accepted theory of speech signal modeling, we need both long-term predictor and short-term predictor, which correspond to periodic component generator and vocal tract filter, respectively, or adapt this type of speech signal model. But the WaveNet does the same, only by a single nonlinear predictor. At that time, I thought that I must have been caught by the conventional way of thinking. And I remember the famous word shown here. Every time I fire linguist, the performance of the speech recognizer goes up. I'm afraid that in the near future, someone would modify it, as shown here. I hope it does not happen. Anyway, WaveNet is a kind of revolution, and then many different types of DNNs for waveform generation have been proposed, as shown here. Autoregressive ones, normalizing flow for parallel computation, combining with source filter model, introducing signal processing technique. We also proposed one, but let me skip it because of a time limitation. And in this morning, just after this session, there is a session titled Neural Waveform Generation, so we can find some more in that session. Okay, another problem is temporal modeling or duration modeling. In the HSMM case, the duration model is included in the statistical generator model. On the other hand, in the simple DNN case, including LSTM, WaveNet, we need an external duration predictor, as shown here. Phoneme level feature sequence is converted to the frame level feature sequence, and then neural network converts it to the speech feature sequence, frame by frame. So we need an external duration predictor to convert it from phoneme level to frame level. However, for better modeling accuracy, it should be included in the acoustic model. To solve the problem, we borrowed the hidden Markov model structure. The neural network outputs parameters of each state of HSM, state Gaussian for modeling speech feature vectors, and Gaussian for state duration modeling. As a result, we can define the utterance level likelihood with respect to speech feature sequence on the trellis, which define the alignment between phoneme sequence and speech feature sequence. This system works pretty well, even for a very small database, less than 1 hour. It's also very useful for speaker adaptation because the duration models can be adapted simultaneously. And then, in 2017, end-to-end speech synthesis, attention-based architectures were applied to combine these two submodules. Tactron 2, shown in this slide, is one of them. It consists of encoder, decoder, and attention. Encoder roughly corresponds to text analysis, and decoder corresponds to acoustic feature generation, and attention corresponds to mapping between text and acoustic feature sequence. And this is kind of duration model. Tactron 2 uses WaveNet as vocoder, and it was very impressive that it achieved a speech quality comparable to natural speech in most listening tests. It should be noted that it's difficult to apply Tactron-type architecture to some other languages whose writing system is complicated, for example, Japanese. So some systems apply the attention mechanism only to this part. In this case, it can be regarded as an acoustic model with a duration model like DNN HSMM. In this context, the posterior probability on the trails can be regarded as a kind of attention. Okay. In the end-to-end approach, these intermediate variables are hidden or not well defined in the end-to-end system, so we cannot control them. However, we often need to modify intermediate variables. For example, customer may ask to correct the wrong pronunciation of the system, but it's difficult to correct it in an end-to-end system. Therefore, those variables should be latent, but obtained in a semi-supervised manner. This should be one of future research topics. What about deep learning in singing synthesis? Compared to reading speech, singing synthesis has longer temporal correlation. To model such long-term correlation, we apply CNN for acoustic modeling. I would like to show some demos. Okay, for Japanese.
最後の1秒まで集めたこの想い積み重ね
And English.
There's a fire stirring in my heart, reaching a fever pitch and bringing me out the dark. Find it.
And Chinese.
的交换，把一个人的温暖转移到另一个的胸膛，让上次犯的错。
I think it can reproduce realistic singing voices by using long-term correlation of singing speech. Okay. And I think we are running out of time. And let me skip this slide. Those are very important and should be applied to speech synthesis. And I'd like to mention topics that are not directly related to speech synthesis technology, but important for progressing in evaluation. And data and software tools. With the rise of corpus-based speech synthesis systems were tuned to the particular database being used. And accordingly, it was hard to compare techniques used in the different systems. In order to better understand the different speech synthesis techniques on common dataset, the challenge was devised. During my sabbatical stay at CMU, Alan and I discussed evaluation methods of speech synthesis and reached a conclusion that we needed a common dataset for evaluation. After my sabbatical, ISCA synthesis workshop was held in Pittsburgh in 2004, and at the conference venue, Alan told me that he recorded a speech database named Arctic and was ready to organize an evaluation challenge. Then it was kicked off. Initially, I did not expect that the HMM-based system got good scores in the challenge. It was just exciting for me to design and organize such new type of challenge events. However, Tomoki Toda and Heiga Zen, who were postdocs in our research group at that time, told me that they were serious. And the HMM-based system was improved drastically in a few months. They introduced hidden semi-colon model, straight, DV-based parameter generation, and so on, and got excellent scores. It was a good opportunity to make the HMM-based approach visible in the research community. From this event, I learned that collaboration between young excellent researchers like Tomoki and Heiga can make a big step change. Also, I would like to mention that the Blizzard Challenge progressed to an annual event, and most events have been organized by Simon King and his colleagues from 2007. And it should be noted that organizing such event every year is very tough. Okay, so I think I should skip those slides. Okay, voice conversion has a close relationship to speech synthesis. A DNA approach has emerged also in voice conversion research. Yesterday, there was a tutorial on voice conversion. It should be noted that real-time application is essential because it could be in offline processing, we can combine speech recognition and speech synthesis. And the real-time prosody conversion is a challenge problem because supersegmental features have to be modified. And it seems that WebNet and other neural waveform generation approaches may bring a paradigm shift to speech coding. We also propose some types of WebNet-based speech coding schemes. And in posture using speech synthesis, in the late 90s, we noticed that speaker-adapted speech synthesis systems can be used for imposture to speaker verification systems. Now it becomes a real fear, and a series of anti-spoofing challenges started in 2015. And please note that the third challenge results will be presented tomorrow afternoon in this conference. And physical simulation. The question is that, will it be possible to generate natural sounding speech based on the physical simulation approach? The advantage of this approach is that realistic constraint can be provided, or a lower dimensional representation. And it could be useful for latent representation also in DNN-based system. Okay, I talked about statistical approach to speech synthesis, in which whole speech synthesis process is described in a statistical generative model-based framework. And now it has reached at the level that we cannot tell the difference between human and machine for reading speech. But I think we just reached a new starting line. Still, we have a lot of problems to be solved. As shown here, those are applications, and those are research topics. Basically, we need more flexibility and controllability for realizing diversity of natural speech. So my final message is this. Let's enjoy speech synthesis research for realizing diversity of natural speech. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very, very nice talk. We may have a short time for questions. There's student helpers around with microphones. Please identify yourself. But people are apparently running for coffee. There will be plenty, don't be
Yeah, I'll
scared.
be in the coffee area, so you can ask questions.
Okay, so maybe we thank you again and keep the questions for the coffee break, if I don't see any.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And you may know that such a conference takes a lot of helpers in the background, and those helpers have also allowed me to prepare something for Professor Tokuda. So, oops, I cannot.
Okay.
Please take this as a token of appreciation, showing you at the talk right here in a nice photography that you may take home.
Thank you very much.
And there will be more to be said during the closing session, so be sure to be present. Okay, thank you. And enjoy the coffee break. It's not only outside here, it's also upstairs in the upper level next to the other exhibition area. Please use both areas because you're plentiful, so spread out.
was already here. He said he'd take the podium mic.
Okay.
Was the Chinese?
Chinese?
Yeah.
Vietnamese?
Oh, Vietnamese.
Is anybody of you the second speaker?
No.
Yeah? No.
No, we're the session chairs.
You're the session. Yeah, sorry. Because we are responsible for having them sign. Second main paper.
Second or third? Yeah, you're the second one that comes here. No, I'm Feuer Metze. I'm the session chair.
Quite late.
You're just in time.
Oh, you have a new version?
Okay. The first presenter have a new version slide there. Okay.
Who's not reading? So yeah, what you should do is try out one of the headsets. Or it's really up to you. So you could just let them know what you podium. All right, so the third talk, the second short talk, is going to use a podium mic. It's a 40-minute slot.
Yes.
They're supposed to present for 30 minutes and then 8 minutes questions and 8 minutes switch over. With a session chair.
Sorry. Shall we start soon? It's 11 o'clock.
Is it 11 o'clock
Yeah,
already?
it's 11.
Oh yeah.
Could you give us the hand?
We're sharing, yeah.
I don't remember who said. I mean,
Thank you. Yes, we're here, but not all the presenters shown their faces yet. Morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good to see you.
Okay, I'm
Hi,
ready to
nice
go
to
to
see
sleep. I've been up for hours.
Nice to see you. Jamie.
All right, we have all the slides.
There's a ton of reverberation here. In fact, all the rooms have a ton of reverberation, so we should be recording data. Doing speech recognition
For the next
reverberation. It's
challenge.
terrible. Yeah, the next challenge. Oh, and he's getting I think this room is cold.
I see there. I see that corner.
Second?
I see that corner.
Hey. Oh. Sehr relaxed aus. Ich muss jetzt mal zur Abwechslung was arbeiten. Was macht das?
Hello, everyone. This is the session with the end-to-end speech recognition. It will start soon. We are the co-chair for this session. I'm Yanmin Qian from Shanghai Jiao Tong University.
I'm Florian Metze from Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, everybody.
And the first talk is given by Ralph Schluter, and it is a survey talk. Let's welcome.
Okay, so welcome everyone this morning, and to be here, it's nice to be here to give you a presentation on modeling in automatic speech recognition beyond hidden Markov models. So in this presentation, I will also try to connect the current upsurge of end-to-end modeling to our former traditional HMM-based modeling approaches. And To start, so first of all, the current situation in ASR is that the decade brought about 50% relative improvement in word error rate by introducing artificial neural networks to all levels of modeling. And the traditional state of the art actually is challenged by novel end-to-end, so-called end-to-end ASR architectures. And the enabling factor are generic machine learning tools developed for diverse and complex tasks. So ASR in itself is a very challenging task, and there are advantages from a method evaluation viewpoint here. It provides a clear performance objective. This is word error rate. We have strong state-of-the-art performance to compete against for new approaches, and there's various and diverse, well-covered benchmarks. And topics of interest currently, also when comparing the more traditional and more novel approaches, is what's the performance versus the system complexity we have to apply? How do we do actually alignment on our variable length sequences? So what possibilities do we have beyond hidden Markov models? And what's the primary training data and secondary knowledge sources relation here, where end-to-end approaches really try to concentrate on the primary data only. And finally, the question is, how can we actually reuse our inferred knowledge once we have trained our systems? Let's start with a principal discussion of statistical sequence classification. So tasks not only are automatic speech recognition, but handwriting recognition or machine translation. And the most general case would be that we have variable length input, variable length output. And what we want to have is the true distribution PW given X, which can be extremely complex for sequence modeling. And this distribution we need for Bayes decision rule to get the minimal error rate. Now, let's revisit the statistical approach here. So we start from a performance measure. In ASR, this would be word error rate. It judges the quality of our system output, and ideally it should be used on all levels of modeling and also on decoding. So what we need is probabilistic models here. We want to capture the dependencies on our elementary observations. This can be done or was done with Gaussian mixtures, with log linear models, support vector machines, all kinds of artificial neural networks. And on the string level, we might apply n-gram Markov assumptions, hidden Markov models, conditional random fields, recurrent neural networks, LSTMs, attention transformer, and there will possibly come much more like these. For training, we want to learn our free parameters, and this should possibly be linked to the performance criterion, but we should also possibly ask what's the effect of doing that. And we have a very complex optimization problem to solve with a huge number of parameters, which seems to be ever increasing these days. And finally, there's Bayes decision rule. Bayes decision rule tells us how to obtain optimal error rate, and the output word sequence is generated here by solving a combinatorial problem where we have to apply efficient algorithms like dynamic programming, beam search. Therefore, speech recognition can be seen as the problem of modeling in a statistical way and applying efficient algorithms to get good performance and efficient result. Now, let's have a short look at the sequence decision rule. For sequences, we would have a corresponding loss function, which ideally would be word error rate based on edit distance or Levenstein alignment. And Bayes decision rule minimizes our expected loss. However, this is not directly tractable when we use a loss function based on Levenstein alignment. So therefore, usually the standard decision rule is used where we apply a 0-1 loss on the level of sequences. However, it can be shown, and even theoretically be shown, that in many cases, the decision of the more complex Bayes decision rule using a sequence level loss function and the one with a word level loss function do actually give us the same result. A very simple example of these conditions would be that the posterior probability for one sequence is at least 1/2. In that case, once you have a metric loss, you will always get the same result independent of the loss. Just providing that it's metric, you will always have the same result as the standard decision rule. Now, let's come back to the term end-to-end. I think there is I mean, looking at this conference, at the many sessions which are termed end-to-end, I think we still have to think about what does it really mean. Now, referring to traditional approaches in automatic speech recognition, the idea of a statistical approach was to do integrated decisions end-to-end. We have many knowledge sources. We have signal analysis, we have subword modeling, we have pronunciation lexica as secondary knowledge sources, we have language models being trained on separate training data, possibly on separate textual data. We have our search approach, and we have interaction between all these levels. And ideally, there would not be intermediate decisions, but we would collect all this knowledge from the input until the output and do a final global decision. And I think this is end-to-end in its word meaning. And also training, nowadays having discriminative sequence training criteria, we are able to also train the more traditional or hybrid HMM systems end-to-end. Certainly we insert secondary knowledge like a phoneme set, a pronunciation lexicon, and in case of language modeling also additional textual data. But apart from that, we can train end-to-end. So we really have to discuss what we mean by end-to-end. It's not just a term for novel approaches in my view. And with the next step, let me give you a short historical overview of how ASR developed, possibly in the last 10 years, let's say. And what we see is actually a state-of-the-art in transition. So let's start with the traditional approach using HMMs and also using a standard decomposition of our posterior distribution into a language model and an acoustic model. And the acoustic model links the hypothesis W1 up to N, a word sequence or a label sequence, to our observation sequence. And one problem we had to solve in ASR, and we solved for a long time with hidden Markov models, was the problem of speaking rate variation, which led to nonlinear time alignment. And in that case, using a hidden Markov model of first order, we end up in frame-wise transition and emission probabilities. And the emission probabilities for a long time were modeled with Gaussian mixture distributions. And putting things together, we get an architecture like introduced by Bal and Jelinek in '83, where we have overall more or less 4 parts. We have the feature extraction part. For a long time, this was manually crafted. We have our acoustic model and the language model, and we have the global search procedure, which tries to find the word sequence which gives the overall best posterior probability. And now, by and by, modifications were introduced. First of all, with the introduction of better and better models, also we were able to reduce our search spaces more and more. And starting from A star or sector decoders, dynamic programming lexical prefix tree was introduced. Then look-ahead techniques, both acoustically and on the level of the language model. Weighted finite state transducer decoding, a very generic approach to search. And finally, with the upsurge of also long context modeling, also one-pass search algorithms using recurrent neural network-based language models were introduced. Then the next step was to introduce neural networks, deep neural networks into acoustic modeling. The first suggestion here with respect to the hidden Markov model was the hybrid HMM introduced by Boulard and Morgan in '93. Although Robinson in '94 already had recurrent neural networks at the start, giving at that time state-of-the-art performance, it was not really replacing state-of-the-art at that time because training was quite complex and the machinery was not yet able to handle this in a very efficient way. The hybrid approach only took up momentum when Seide in 2011 introduced it to large vocabulary recognition successfully. There's also another line of research which is, in my view, quite interesting, which is trying to use deep models directly to generate generative models, as followed by McDermott and presented on NIPS last year. Then there's also approaches to introduce neural network structures into the feature extraction pipeline. There's most of all the tandem approach, which also was the first approach to really give considerable improvements on top of Gaussian mixture distributions. First, in 2000 by Hermansky and Ellis. There was even an earlier contribution by Fontaine and Ries in 1997 termed nonlinear discriminant analysis, which is effectively a similar approach. And then there's also the bottleneck approach, which does not take the output of a phone classifier as additional features, but some internal bottleneck layer. Then there is the integrated learning of acoustic model and feature extraction. So here you see that the feature extraction is removed from the process, and we now try to model our time signal directly. This was done by us and also by Pallas and Colobert in 2013, and by now Google even reports very good results for this on multi-channel processing. So the models we have currently have such a high potential that we can even model the variabilities we observe directly in the time signal. Then also language modeling was considered in 2007. Schwenk introduced feed-forward language models to ASR. We also did some work in doing very long context feed-forward language models recently. Then Mikolov in 2010 introduced recurrent networks. In 2012, followed by the LSTM structure used for language modeling, which is more or less currently the state of the art. And actually, the screen is off here now, the big one. Would be nice to have that. Thank you. Finally, currently there's a number of groups also introducing transformer language models, which when sentence lengths are not too short, really gives considerable further improvements on top of the already highly optimized LSTM language modeling. And then finally, there's a whole set of novel approaches, usually termed as sequence-to-sequence or end-to-end. So first of all, we would mention here the connectionist temporal classification, then refinements using label dependence or modeling label dependence in terms of RNN transducer and recurrent neural aligner. Then there is the encoder attention decoder approach, also very well known, the listen attendant spell. And finally, there's also the transformer model used nowadays. We also investigated an inverted HMM approach where we try to use the HMM structure in a discriminative way directly. I will also give more details on that. And finally, we also experiment with two-dimensional LSTMs, modeling both the input and output sequence together with two-dimensional LSTM structures. And with that, I would like to look into some more detail here. So have a look at the ASR modeling approaches, and let's start with generative modeling. So in generative modeling, we keep the standard decomposition into acoustic and language model. And with the first order hidden Markov model, we then have our frame-wise emission probabilities and transition probabilities. And traditionally here, Gaussian mixtures were used to model these emission probabilities. And on the state posterior level, we could also say, well, Gaussians with pooled covariance metrics actually are equivalent to log linear models with linear features. So the transition from a generative to a discriminative model is more or less seamless here. Also, a Gaussian mixture is equivalent to a log linear mixture model, so with a latent variable. And what are possibilities to introduce neural network modeling while keeping the hidden Markov model alignment process? And one is the already mentioned tandem approach. Effectively, we want to do a deep processing directly of our input features. Advantage is that all well-established methods we know from Gaussian mixture HMMs can be used. In particular, also well-researched speaker adaptation approaches, discriminative sequence training, although these currently certainly also make its way into the novel end-to-end approaches. There's also cross or multilingual training data which we can exploit. That's a strong advantage of the tandem approach and has been used widely in, for example, in the Babel project. And we can even bootstrap from minimal amounts of target task training data because these multilingual or tandem models nicely represent generic properties of human speech production. A disadvantage, however, is that training usually is twofold and thus inconsistent. We have two models that are required, tandem DNN and Gaussian mixture or hybrid HMM. However, fine-tuning can still be done end-to-end, as we presented in a paper in 2015. Then there's the hybrid HMM approach, which is, I would say, with respect to performance, still the state-of-the-art approach in ASR. It's usually based on phonetic labels. The typical approach is to apply decision trees to do a clustering into generalized triphone states. We have a hidden Markov model, which then is rewritten on the level of the emission probabilities into discriminative probabilities with respect to our phonetic states. And the result is that we have a phone label emission distribution that we model by a phone label posterior probability by a deep neural network. We have an easier learning problem here because we have only 10 to the power of 4, on the order of 10 to the power of 4 labels, whereas when training the generative probability directly, we have to model distributions over observation vectors that are real valued and with a dimension on the order of 100. And this is a well-known result in pattern recognition, but has been ignored for a long time in the area of ASR. Now we could also compare hybrid versus tandem. I don't want to go into detail here. Most important is to bear in mind that viewing the combination of tandem features and the Gaussian mixture can also be reinterpreted as a very specific hybrid approach and can also be trained end-to-end, which we have shown in papers in 2015. And there's also other approaches towards deep generative modeling. So we combine, in that case, for example, McDermott combined deep tandem features with deep density models. And what we can learn also here is from text-to-speech. So this has been nicely introduced by Chandra in 2017 to utilize text-to-speech for unsupervised training. But this also brings in the issue of speaker dependence and adaptation, which was handled by Chandra in 2018. Now, the next step would be to get rid of the original decomposition into a separate language model and an acoustic model and try to do discriminative modeling of our label posterior probability directly. And there's currently two possibilities to do that. One is keeping, say, the time dimension and trying to define labels time on a time-by-time frame level. And the other is to directly model the output label sequence directly. And in the time-synchronous approach, we try to redefine labels from the original label positions into labels in each time frame. And alignment in that case is handled that each individual, there might be different individual settings of the labels on the frame level which still represent the same original label sequence. And then the corresponding alignment is seen as a latent variable and so we sum over all alignments in that case. And we have a deterministic frame to label mapping in this case, so we sum over all sequences, frame level alignments, which are in line with the original label sequence. And if we further introduce label independence, it directly leads us to CTC. And if we consider full label context in this case, we end up in the RNN transducer or recurrent neural aligner. So the displays are going on and off all the time here. So I'm not seeing here anything currently. Well, they're also. So connectionist temporal classification. So the idea here is to introduce, in addition to the usual labels, a blank label. such that, as you see in the example here, the label sequence speech here, so considering the characters here as the labels, you can generate repetitions of the characters. If they are not, if there's not blank in between, it's still seen as a single occurrence of the original label. However, here in speech we have two E's, so if a sequence of E's, of repetitions of E's, is here broken by a blank label, then we would hypothesize another label here. And assuming statistical independence, then our posterior distribution could be modeled here as a product over frame posteriors over the individual frame-wise labels. So this is related to the hybrid HMM approach because we have a specific topology here where we have two states per label when we view the corresponding blank label distribution as, or the blank label as a globally pooled state which each label shares and which can be omitted even. And what we do not do, however, here is a division by a state prior. And during training, we sum over the alignments, and here you see a corresponding example of a specific path. And in training, we would actually sum over all paths. In search and decoding, it's quite interesting to see that, first of all, CTC would give us a very simple decision rule. Because of the label independence, we can decide individually for each time frame. This is very closely related to the approach of defining a loss function in base decision rule on a frame-by-frame level. If we do that, as we did in 2001 already, you have this cost function, which is just a 0-1 loss on a frame-by-frame level. You end up in the same frame-by-frame decision rule. Certainly, possibly here, you can insert any model here for the posterior distribution on the frame level. But the decision rule formally would be the same. Now, however, with the language model, CTC goes back to something which is very similar to the hybrid HMM and using a standard decoding approach, for example, WFST. Then there's the recurrent neural aligner, where we introduce where we drop the label independence assumption of CTC, and more common, the recurrent neural network transducer. The only difference between these two is that the hypothesization of a label always would be an empty transition in the RNNT approach, so you only go upwards here, you don't forward in time, whereas here we are continuous, so in each step we either emit an empty symbol or a label. And then there is the other set of approaches, label synchronous discriminative modeling. In that case, we decompose our label sequence posterior probability directly on a label-by-label level. However, the question then is, how do the position-wise label posteriors access or align to the corresponding input intervals? And there's different possibilities of doing that. In the encoder-decoder attention approach and the transformer approaches, we do attention in time. In the segmental inverse HMM, we introduce a latent variable and model label boundaries explicitly. And the other way around, in the two-dimensional LSTM approach, we do a temporal averaging and we do not do explicit alignment at all. Advantage is, in all of these cases, we end up in an integrated model that fully exploits interaction between input and label sequence. And the disadvantage is that the training domain is integrated here, especially if you use a decoder which uses recurrent neural networks or which actually covers long context structures. Then it's difficult to, say, get away from training your language modeling domain into your global model. So how can we do that domain transfer in that case? And that's also the subject of many papers nowadays. Then there is the attention-based encoder-decoder approach. The most important property is that to concentrate for a specific individual label posterior in a specific position, attention weights are defined to do a weighted average over your input, where these attention weights depend on the previous decisions and the complete temporal input. And some observations here is that the attention is determined by the context and does not consider the current label. Therefore, it cannot cover for, say, a wide length distribution directly, not in terms of the attention weights itself. We will later see an example how this is actually done in attention. And attention intervals also are not revised after label hypothesization, so there's no recombination, so it's effectively an intermediate decision. There's also observations that there is a left-right asymmetry, as shown by Mimura and Sakai in 2018. And however, this approach gives competitive performance reported for sufficiently large training sets. So here we see an example of attention weights for a short sequence here. And what we see is that the attention weights are quite sparse and they do not even cover the complete temporal input. And this means that there has to be a strong interaction between the decoder and the encoder. So during training, we have to make sure that the encoder actually concentrates the necessary information into these sparse positions in time. Then there is the segmental or inverted HMM, where we simply introduce label boundaries as a latent variable and marginalize over it. Then there's different possibilities of decomposing and of modeling. That's still, this is still work in progress. So we did not yet even consider label dependence, label context here, but you will see some first results later. So here we also see a comparison between the alignment process for a standard HMM and here for the inverted HMM, where we here have the corresponding automaton over the state sequence. This is over the target labels, and here we have it on the temporal level in terms of our label boundaries. This has also been introduced in machine translation quite successfully with good results similar to attention, and there was even a group in 2019 which showed consistently better results in terms of bleu for what they call posterior attention, which is effectively such an approach for machine translation. And then there is the two-dimensional LSTM introduced by us also. In that case, we use two-dimensional LSTM structures to cover both the input and output dimension at the same time. For decoding, we then pool over time completely to get the posterior for an output symbol, and we will also later see results for that. So coming to the results. First of all, here, the inverted HMM approach is not yet considering on the acoustic level label context. Using triphone states here and having a language model on word level, we got 13% here on the switchboard part, training on 300 hours. And the 2D LSTM, together with spectral augmentation, using BPE units as target labels, gave us 10.6. Then for attention, depending on the language model we use, we get something between 9 and 10%. This also was done for Interspeech here, results for the test other corpus. And however, the hybrid approach still gives the best result. When training on 300 hours, I think the case where we use a transformer language model, getting 6.6% on the switchboard part, that's still the best result when training on 300 hours, as far as I know. So hybrid still is state of the art here. I did not talk about the efficiency or usability in a commercial context. We also were interested in evaluating the approaches with respect to the amount of training data needed. So when you try to train an attention system on 10 hours, at least in our case, we did not succeed in converging the model. However, HMM, no problem, 13%, with BLSTM acoustic model, even 9%. If we move to 50 hours, then we also converge for attention, get 23%. If we move to 100 hours, the attention approach is almost as good as the Gaussian mixture, whereas the hybrid HMM with the BLSTM acoustic model gives half the error rate. And finally, using the full 1,000 hours of the LibriSpeech task, we get quite near already, but still also here the hybrid approach would give us the best result. That's recent results, which also will be presented on this Interspeech. And considering this Interspeech, there's quite interesting set of papers, a lot of papers introducing or discussing current end-to-end approaches. And I tried to summarize these. I hope I did a good job here and did not overlook too much, also for the size of the table. But these all are results either from this Interspeech or even in 2 cases from upcoming ASRU in December. And first of all, there is here 2 cases using convolutional structures for the encoder, using either CTC or attention, getting similar results, quite good results already on the LibriSpeech test task. And then there was a quite influential paper by Google, which is also presented here by Park and co-workers, which already got a really good 2.5 and 5.8% on the LibriSpeech test task. And we see a number of other papers getting into a similar domain, or even better here in this case with an LSTM encoder and a transformer language model by Kim and Shin and co-workers, getting down to extremely good 2.4 and 5.3% on the clean and other condition. But again, hybrid is better. So the hybrid still is state of the art. That's also a paper we present here on this Interspeech. So using an LSTM hybrid encoder, hybrid HMM approach with a transformer language model gets us down to 2.3% on clean and 5.0% on other, and that's the best result on LibriSpeech we know of. And now we could do some analysis. I have not too much time, so I might skip some of those. But for one point, it's quite interesting to look into the encoder, because all of these approaches somehow share more or less the same or similar encoders. So you could say define a BLSTM, a deep BLSTM. You can use this for a hybrid HMM. You can use this for any of these end-to-end approaches. So that seems to be a really important part, that on top of our original input features, we have a deep artificial neural network structure. So let's assume we have a deep bidirectional LSTM in a hybrid case and in an attention case, and the structure of the model is more or less the same. So, but however, how does the encoder output look after we train the systems? So what we see here is this very sparse output we get from the encoder in the case of an attention model. It's not nicely projected here, but you will see more lines of that, but it's quite sparse. And on top you see the corresponding, in color, the corresponding attention weights for the different BPE units, which in this case accidentally were full words. And if we do the same for the hybrid model, the hybrid model formally does not have an encoder, but you could view the complete structure just right before the output layer as the encoder of a hybrid HMM approach. And looking at this, it's not at all sparse, as you can see. So there's lots of activity here. Here also, we actually aligned the corresponding phonetic symbols here, but you will always see a lot of activity here. So what does that tell us? Although having exactly the same BLSTM structure in both cases, there seems to be a strong interaction between the actual decoder structure and the encoder. So in training, when training with attention, we actually end up in a much, much different output of the encoder. And we could also look into the alignment behavior. For attention, we already know that this is quite sparse. So here in pink, we have the corresponding attention weights, which are sparse over time. There's some level of time reduction, so this is just one frame on the output of the encoder here. We also have here the hybrid HMM with the feed-forward and with inverted HMM here in gray and black. They more or less align nicely. If we go to another variant of the inverted HMM, we also see non-coverage in between. And then the CTC, similar to the attention approach, also is quite peaky. And the attention is strongly localized, and and we have an interaction here, as I said. So now I have to skip some of those. So we can also look into vocabulary modeling, and it's quite interesting to look at, say, Zipf's law in that case, which becomes somehow a dichotomy of, say, two parts. So starting here from the corresponding words here, rank over frequency, which gives us here more or less a straight line. If we introduce BPE, we get always at some point a break here, so we have two curves with completely different gradient, and shows the advantage also of putting together labels, as is done often in the attention approaches. I will drop this one and this one and come to my conclusions. So a common characterization of end-to-end systems is they directly convert input, this is the audio signal, into output, this is word sequences, and we do not involve intermediate representations here. This is like a phoneme set or a pronunciation lexicon, but it can be trained from scratch end-to-end to optimize performance measure. This is word error rate in this case. However, integrated decisions end-to-end based on all knowledge sources, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a natural goal of the statistical approach to ASR. However, also there we have to think about the effect of beam search, which implicitly also gives us intermediate decisions, or search complexity certainly, or model complexity on the other hand. Also a question is, do we want to use secondary or additional knowledge sources? Is it helpful, or can we bring our end-to-end approaches to also take advantage of that, especially when the amount of training data is less? And with that, the current situation is that in training, any ASR system today is sequence discriminative trainable end-to-end. However, pre-training, prior training with different objective might be necessary. That possibly applies both to hybrid HMM and also to the end-to-end approaches. It's not a black box we just apply and get the best result. And there's hyperparameter optimization, which also concerns all approaches, is very important nowadays. And there's varying amounts of training data, and especially for low amounts, the question is, how do we insert external knowledge sources or take advantage of existing models of other domains? And how can we do a transition from the standard to the novel end-to-end models? And in recognition, strictly speaking, only CTC is fully searchable, because we can just decide in each frame separately, but this certainly comes at the cost of label context modeling. For small vocabulary and short context, we can certainly do without pruning. All other cases are not strictly optimal. This is also not strictly end-to-end. So beam search, pruning, the global optimum is not guaranteed. Exponential search tree with a recurrent neural network model, even more. And how does an end-to-end system indicate uncertainty? Also a very interesting question. And finally, even in end-to-end approaches, I really like that title, I have to say, of the paper presented here, two-pass end-to-end. Logically, I'm still thinking about this, but anyway, certainly it also might make sense to introduce multi-pass strategies, as we did for a long time in standard processing, into end-to-end approaches. And we might even want to think about, is end-to-end the right term? Thank you.
Okay, Ralf, thank you very much. Just like for the keynote speakers, we have a souvenir for you. For the first ever given survey talk at Interspeech. Congratulations.
Oh, right in time.
Yeah,
very nice. Thank you.
Real-time production. Congratulations.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for
yeah.
questions. So
yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. The next talk will be on very deep self-attention networks for end-to-end speech recognition. And the presenter will be Nyongok Kwam from the KIT.
First question is, how much time do I have? 20 minutes or okay. Okay. Hello. Thank you everyone for coming for my presentation. Excuse me because of the lights are completely reflecting everything I see in front of my face, so I can't really see any one of you. So it's not a good thing, but thank you for coming to my presentation, in which